Hello, friends. Welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm bringing you a chilling glimpse into the future of Florida's housing market. Brace yourself as we unveil the 2024 disaster that definitely awaits.
We addicted to fast cars, bad bras, late nights, last calls, alcohol, bad. Just scrolling through the phone log, hit 'em up. All my low, say motherfuck the PO and the judge. But if they come with us, just know it's love. I'm saying just because. Yeah. Cause we been coming from welfare, Medi-Cal, healthcare. Living in the hood is hell here, hell yeah. I'm saying just because. Love.
Oh, yeah. Awesome.
Oh, fucking God, I missed this car. Were you expecting that?
No, I wasn't. In 2024, Florida will face a housing market nightmare like never before. Experts predict a catastrophic collapse that will rock the entire state. And homeowners across Florida will be left devastated to unprecedented lows. Foreclosure signs will line the streets and abandoned houses will become a haunting sight, a reflection of the economic turmoil that grips the region. Families will be forced to search high and low for affordable housing, facing uncertainty and hardship like never before. And renters will be crammed into overcrowded and dilapidated rental properties as landlords take advantage of the crisis.
Now that the pandemic's renter protection programs have expired, eviction filing rates are soaring. Princeton University's eviction lab says that in some cities, the average weekly filings are more than 50% higher than they were before the pandemic. One reason is the rising rents and a shortage of affordable housing for those with the lowest incomes.
And the elderly who have spent their entire lives in their cozy homes will find themselves struggling to make ends meet, trapped in a cycle of financial distress. And the once thriving construction industry will take a drastic hit, leaving hardworking men and women without jobs and a bleak future. Government officials will attempt to address the crisis, but the road to recovery will be long and arduous. Yet amid all that chaos, we will witness the resilience and compassion of the Florida people, the community, coming together to support each other during these very dark times.
Everyone is happy, everyone is proud.
As we look towards the horizon, we can only hope for brighter days in Florida's housing market. But why is this housing disaster happening to begin with? The U.S. economy is not looking really good, and there are so many issues that are going on right now that are affecting Americans financially and will be in the coming months. I don't think there are many people that are actually prepared with what they really need to do to get through what some economists, some experts believe will be something worse than the global financial crisis of 2008.
Well, I think Powell is actually concerned about the evolving financial crisis that has only just gotten started. I think it's going to ultimately exact a heavy toll on the real economy, on the so-called strong labor market. I don't believe that this is a hawkish pause. I mean, Powell admitted that the risks to inflation are still to the upside. He talked about how important it is to get inflation down to 2% and how far away we are from achieving that goal.
But in order to understand what must be done, we must understand where it started. So we must start at the beginning. And I know that during the financial crisis and its aftermath, the biggest error that was made, chiefly by Ben Bernanke and then his successor, Janet Yellen, was fear. They were using fear as a tactic. It was ingrained fear that we can't let the economy stumble and fall. We have to do everything that we can to prevent a down cycle. We must prevent a crash, a recession, or a depression. And what they ended up doing when they pressed forward with the second round of quantitative easing and the second round of money printing and then the third round, you ended up creating an environment where there are bad actors, there are bad players in the economy, which can subsist because the junk bond market is open for business. Hello. And free market capitalism was not allowed to actually play itself out. And instead of poor business models getting washed out of the system, he ended up on life support because the Federal Reserve kept interest rates at zero. And they artificially repressed interest rates, yet they continued to grow their balance sheet. But that only worked for so long. And when Jerome Powell came into office February the 4th of 2018, his first attempt was to wean the economy off of the Fed's extraordinary policies. But that ended up culminating in and along with a major trade war and a full-year contraction in global trade. And when trade contracts for a full year in U.S. history, at least the U.S. economy has always been in recession. We're seeing many of the same patterns that were happening in late 2019. We're seeing them right now today. Said a little bit differently, the number of states that are experiencing blowout jobless claims are a pretty clear indication that we're headed into a recession.
But that was then and this is now.
And back then, the U.S. economy was forcibly closed in March of 2020. And then it was also forcibly reopened because the first stimulus checks, the first round of the CARES Act, which paid people an extra $2,500 a month to not work.
Hey everyone, me Kevin here. We're back with another stimulus update because we actually have some updates here. First, I'm going to talk about two smaller updates, which are very important as well, but then we're going to talk about the elephant in the room. The fourth stimulus check.
Those federal unemployment stipends hit American bank accounts on April the 15th of 2020, which tells me that the U.S. economy has been in an expansion since June of 2009. And if not for the extraordinary stimulus measures that were undertaken after the pandemic hit, we would have been in a recession a long time ago. But we all know that fiscal stimulus continues to this day. And despite the fact that we're 172 months into the longest period, the longest recovery, the longest technical expansion in U.S. history, most economists still don't understand that trickle-down economics have failed in the long run. And what we've seen over the past several decades is the amount of money that CEOs pay themselves has gone up exponentially compared to what they'll pay the average worker. So the percent of corporate profits that are going to the workforce has declined significantly over time. Yet share buybacks have exploded, which is a real nice way for you to pay yourself if you happen to be a CEO. The only problem here is most Americans are not CEOs. But right now, I think the fatal flaws of the PhDs, the economic analysts, is that they believe that if the economy is growing or if profits are filtering up to corporate America, then corporate America is going to somehow spend money, more money, on their employees, on their workers. And if that is true, then everybody benefits. Unfortunately, that's not the way the real world works.
Fast food workers are celebrating after Governor Gavin Newsom signed a law that will raise the minimum wage to $20 an hour.
Cheering fast food workers and labor leaders gathered around Governor Gavin Newsom as he signed the bill that will pay them at least $20 an hour.
What a gift.
All right, let's get you up to speed with McDonald's, another big mover here. The company reporting better than expected earnings, yet we're looking at the stock off just about 1.5%. The beat coming after McDonald's raised its prices by about 10% in its previous quarter to combat those higher operating costs that we've been hearing about.
Greed is real. Corruption is real. And we've seen it play itself out in real time. And yet the Fed continues to try the same exact solutions every time. And the only thing that it creates is a higher level of aggregate debt. And debt eats equity. What Jerome Powell did in 2019 initially with the pivot was to jump back into full-blown quantitative easing, buying mortgaged-backed securities on a scale of magnitude that had never been seen before. What Big Papa Powell failed to realize at the time was that he could have gone in another direction at the same time the world was melting down. He could have, when the pandemic first struck, simply gone into treasuries without quantitative easing. Yet he didn't. In fact, the pendulum swung in the opposite direction. The Fed bought a third of the mortgage-backed securities market. A third, 60%. Two-thirds of the mortgage in this country are south of 4%. The golden handcuffs that exist in the market right now are real. And the unintended consequence is the lack of mobility that homeowners have. It's causing the stagnation in the economy to be worse than it would otherwise, because there are jobs out there. But most Americans will not leave their homes. But I follow the mortgage market very closely. November of 2023 is the first month that Americans who have taken advantage of the forbearance measures that exist are going to get squeezed. There are Americans out there who have not paid their mortgage since March of 2020. And behind the scenes, behind closed doors, there is a massive push to get another 12-month extension of mortgage payments. But the odds of that deal getting brokered, in my opinion, are zero. Now, let's keep in mind that Americans in October, for the first time in a long time, are forced to pay their student debt. So the American consumer who is already in trouble now has to pay back their student loans. So for many Americans that are upside down in their homes right now, November is going to be the first month that they have to make their mortgage payment. And that, to me, spells economic disaster, financial disaster. At the peak of the last housing bubble, FHA loans were south of 4% of the loans that were being made overall. That number has grown exponentially. It's north of 17% today. And while most people aren't talking about it, it's obvious there are lots of people who squeezed into homes they can't afford. I know for certain there are plenty of lenders who played plenty of games to qualify buyers whose debt to income was on the margin. Well, those folks don't have any clue what they said yes to. The last thing that they were expecting was inflation. Nobody explained to them what escrow was. They certainly were not expecting or pricing in the replacement cost of a new roof. They did not know their numbers. They did not account for their finances the right way. They certainly did not expect property tax assessments to affect their mortgages despite their low mortgage rate. And they sure as heck didn't know how much it cost to replace an air conditioner. And in case you haven't priced out an HVAC recently, essentially it's the same as what a car cost a decade ago. But when you're boiling in your home in the Florida heat because your air conditioner's out, you absolutely must replace your air conditioner.
During the Florida summer, it feels like you're breathing through a wet sock about 99% of the time. And if you live here, your air conditioning bill is going to be through the roof. And God forbid you ever lose power during hurricane season, because if you ain't got AC, you are going to die. And maybe you won't actually die, but you'll probably wish that you had, because it's got to be better than the unrelenting heat that you will definitely feel if your air conditioner does not work.
And I suspect most homeowners have no clue what those costs were or what they are now, because life is more expensive now than at any other time in history. And I certainly don't think Big Papa Powell has a clue how bad off many Americans are going to be due to the speculation that he created in the housing market. And the poor folks who jumped on the Airbnb or vacation rental bandwagon, those folks who don't know their numbers, which is essentially everyone, are going to get crushed.
You saw the title right. I'm quitting Airbnb. No, it's not clickbait. It just doesn't make sense anymore.
Because the numbers no longer make any sense. But that's not the only risk that's out there. We must talk about credit and the risk of default. Right now, there's almost $700 billion worth of credit card and auto loans that were extended that would never have been extended otherwise. Lending standards were deeply loosened. There were banks that were told quietly, if someone can demonstrate they received a stimulus check, well, then go ahead and make the loan. Just substitute that out for income verification. The predatory lending makes me sick, and the implications are staggering. And yet, Nobody's talking about it. But these implications spread out across the market everywhere. Cars, homes, you name it, it's at risk. And then the current administration came in and said to the lenders, hey, by the way, it sure would be nice if you would be inclusive with your lending standards as well. And I certainly don't think they did anybody any favors by suggesting to anyone that they take on more debt than they can afford. And yet it happens anyway. But car repossessions right now are through the roof. And the reality of it is that the number of people that work in that industry is down by about 25%. So they're repossessing as many cars as they can. But if they had more staff, if they had more folks working, there would be more repossessions. But to be clear, they are repossessing the vehicles. They simply aren't selling them. So the risk to the banking system is when these losses are realized, there is going to be economic hell to pay because the loan to value on car loans is about 140 to 150% in some cases. And in many instances, these cars are broken down. They're not even working. They don't run. But why is that relevant? Cars, what does that have to do with the housing market? Well, I'm glad you asked, and I'll be happy to answer. There are lots of folks that fled the city to buy a home in the suburbs, somewhere besides the city. And they did whatever they could to squeeze into the mortgage payment. But now, because they are geographically undesirable to many of the things that they need in their lives, they must have a car. And some folks had to buy a car for the first time in their lives. But when you live in the suburbs, you can't exactly take the subway to the grocery store. So they had no choice but to buy an overpriced car. And the car insurance today exceeds the car payment in many instances. And these folks are also homeowners, and they make enough to have purchased the house and to have purchased the car. But because they make some money, they almost certainly do not qualify for student loan forgiveness. Now, because I am connected to the financial services industry, I had the opportunity to review a portfolio with a credit union that I'm close with, specifically for their cars. And the loans that were originally underwritten have changed radically because there's been a 12-fold increase in migration out of prime into subprime of existing loans. And I hope we all remember what happened to the housing market when subprime loans were a thing. Well, unfortunately, I've got bad news for you. Subprime is back, my friends, and it's not going to be pretty. But don't go pointing the finger at these terrible subprime loan brokers yet. At the time, the credit ratings were inflated by the stimulus measures that were taken. And now that the stimulus measures have disappeared and credit card debt has exploded, and there's been a 12-fold increase into people migrating back into subprime buckets, there is obvious writing on the wall.
Do you mean Jacqueline?
Okay, so that's how it's gonna be. Y'all wanna play. Okay then. I've got my eye on you, Jay Quellen.
So much so that Capital One Financial walked away from its auto loan business in June of 2022. And even today, it's still writing off a ton of bad car and credit card debt because the borrowers are subprime. They simply can't pay the bill.
Listen, my friend Harry and I have every intention of fully reimbursing you.
What is this? What is this? Where's all the money?
That's as good as money, sir. Those are IOUs. See this? That's a car. $275,000. Might want to hang on to that one.
But none of that has hit the housing market yet. I suspect because forbearance existed longer than any type of debt that American households has ever taken on. And while none of this is going to give you the warm and fuzzies, I think it's important that we look through the right lens in order to see what's actually happening right now. And right now, everyone says that employment is great and the job markets are great. And the reports that we're seeing from the government are great. Bidenomics is a massive success, right? Well, sure it is, up until it's not. And revisions are happening, and nobody's talking about it. But there have been 7 recent negative revisions to non-farm payroll data or employment information. Not only is it lagging data, but it's incomplete and manipulated. We're simply not hearing the truth about the data or the statistics that we must know. And let's face it, one thing we all know is that most Americans don't like to pay their bills. And I think there are quite a lot of Americans that are willing to vote to ensure that they don't have to. And I bring that up because if the government starts to hand out stimulus checks the same way they did when the pandemic hit, which was basically a study of universal basic income, which failed miserably, if the government plays games and creates more stimulus, I think we are in serious trouble. I think we see runaway inflation, the dollar will be destroyed, the country will be destroyed, everything that we know and care about will be destroyed. The world will go to hell in a handbasket. And obviously, I'm not rooting for that. I certainly don't want that to be what happens. I have kids. I want them to grow and thrive and have the same opportunities that I did as a child growing up in America. But I share it because there is a tremendous amount that can happen between now and the next potential stimulus milestone. 2025 is a critical milestone on the calendar because if there is a blue wave or if Donald Trump wins the election, the soonest that we will ever see any stimulus is March of 2025, which is not exactly tomorrow. There is a long time between now and then. And between now and then, there will not be any money distributed to American households, which tells me that the household default cycle is finally arriving. And very soon, there will be many Americans who must decide whether they're going to pay their bills or they're going to default and go bankrupt. And it will hit their credit report. It's coming. So there's no place to hide right now. If you own a house, you're either going to make good on the payment or you are going to default. And I suspect there are going to be lots of Americans that default and don't pay their bills and go into foreclosure because debt eats equity. And to be totally transparent, I suspect many of the homeowners that were duped into taking on these financial obligations that didn't understand what they were saying yes to, I don't necessarily believe the default is their fault because when they bought their new home in July of 2022 and the home builder or the homeowner bought down their rate, they were told they could marry the house and date the rate. And there was no chance that mortgage interest rates would go as high as they have. And yet we're sitting at 8% and climbing. But debt eats equity, and this is going to be a tragedy and force a lot of people who were bamboozled into thinking that they can date the rate. Well, they've learned that's not true. But right now, my bigger concern is that the system will manipulate mortgage interest rates down lower. They will do what they must to find something to point to which gets them reelected. But if mortgage prices come back down to 5%, that tells me the Fed has panicked and we are in a deep recession. And the only thing that will matter at that point is whether you have a job and can pay your bills or not. And while I certainly don't wish this on anyone, I feel it is my moral obligation to tell you the truth so that you can make the best decisions for yourself, for your family, and for your financial bottom line. Now, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please subscribe to the channel. Check me out on Twitter where I can never be censored. Follow me on Patreon where I go off. Check out my next video because I suspect you will love it a lot. And until next time,